We really appreciate you saying a couple of words. And we're excited about this next panel session here. We've got Karin Hoelzer on the line, the Senior Director of Patient Advocacy from Bio. So if we could get Karin's screen up and running, I know she's all dialed in. We've got Jack Kalavritinos from JK Strategies and Judy Stecker from Burson here to talk about the view in Washington. As folks know, there's a lot of change in Washington, both in Congress and the administration. And we want to spend a couple of minutes today thinking with you all about how rare disease companies should be approaching policy issues in DC, whether that's on the Hill, whether that's in the agency setting and elsewhere. And so I might start, first of all, we got Karin behind us there. Hey, Karin. So to start, I'd love just a quick introduction from each of you. Karin, I might turn to you first to hear about your work at Bio and your past work at NORD as well, and your commitment to the rare disease community. And Judy and Jack will turn to you in just a moment. Karin, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. So sorry that I can't be with you in person, but I'm certainly there in spirit. What an amazing conference already, and I can't wait for this important discussion. As Matt said, and thank you so much for the kind invitation, I am the Senior Director of Patient Advocacy at Bio, and that really means that I'm the conduit between the patient community, our member companies, and Bio. And as Matt already said, before I joined Bio a couple of months ago, I was a Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs and Policy for NORD. And I know we have NORD CEO on the program in just a little bit. But just really excited to be here. It's such an exciting time for the rare disease community. We've seen so much innovation and so many really groundbreaking therapies and cures. But we also know how vast the unmet need is. There are more than 6,000, 10,000 rare diseases, and almost none of them have treatments. And there's so much opportunity, but there's also so much unmet need. So really looking forward to the conversation today, and yeah, how timely. And thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Karin. Really appreciate it. Judy, I might turn to you if you want to give a background about yourself and your experience, especially with the Trump administration previously, and the founding of Wheeler's Warriors. We want to hear about that too.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So I'm Judy Stecker. I am an executive vice president at Burson, which is a PR firm there, and I, sort of a Swiss Army knife of tactics and things. I work in patient advocacy, external affairs, government relations, earned media, et cetera. You name it, I probably held down on it. But I joined there from HHS. So I was the deputy chief of staff for Secretary Alex Azar under Trump 45. And before that, I was his assistant secretary of public affairs. So I was responsible for communications, external communications across the cabinet agency and its subdivisions, including CMS, FDA, NIH. But I think one of my most important jobs is as a mom. I have a 5-year-old son named Wheeler and a 2-year-old son named Reed. And unlike some of the parents that have spoken earlier, our diagnostic journey happened immediately. My husband and I found out that we were carriers of a rare genetic disease after we had a number of miscarriages. And in trying to grow our family, we had been told that that wasn't going to be possible naturally. So we had taken a break. We were going to look into adoption. I got the job at HHS, and lo and behold, not all methods of contraception are 100%. And we ended up getting pregnant. We decided that we would have Wheeler tested when he was born. He was born on May 1st, and on May 29th of 2019, we found that he was affected with CLN3 juvenile Batten disease. So I'm wearing my stripes. I'm showing my stripes, NORD, as a rare disease mom. But we found out at 4 weeks he was the youngest ever diagnosed with CLN3 type of Batten, because most kids typically are not symptomatic until about 5 or 6 years old. So I have spent the time since HHS really thinking about the unique position I'm in as both a parent and a patient advocate, but understanding the regulatory space and what can really be done in order to help families, but also help family foundations and therapeutic industry get to cures and treatments faster. And so I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal last year for Rare Disease Day. I will likely be writing something again because we still sadly have the same issues, but encourage folks to give that a read as well. But really grateful to be here, and thank you all for everything you're doing for families like mine.
Thanks, Judy. We really appreciate you being here too. Last but not least, Jack Kalavritinos. Jack is the founder of JK Strategies and also the Washington Health Innovation Council, of which Goodwin is a partner. And the Washington Health Innovation Council, Jack's going to tell you about momentarily, but it's a really great cross-industry opportunity to hear different perspectives on the host of issues facing healthcare these days, and in particular, rare disease. Also, Jack is our connection to Congressman Bilirakis. Thank you for arranging that for us, Jack. We are so grateful to have his voice and to hear Chris as well. Jack, please introduce yourself.
Thank you for that. And that was embarrassing that he mentioned it several times. But and my Bilirakis connection, by the way, was right out of law school, and after working on the '92 Bush campaign, Congressman Bilirakis hired me. The first Bilirakis, so his dad was a House member for many years, and slaved away in the minority side, never was in the majority until later in his career. And so I have a very special relationship with that office. Also a special relationship with my former colleague here, Judy, because we were in the trenches together in the office of the secretary at HHS. Although anything that I experienced from 2017 to 2019 was nothing compared to the fact that Judy became Deputy Chief of Staff during COVID at the department that was coordinating the entire U.S. Public health response, including Operation Warp Speed. And at the same time, we then learned about the diagnosis. So I was so fortunate to work with Judy. And yeah, I run a firm that right now is representing a range of clients. So happy to have Goodwin as a sponsor and member of our Washington Health Innovation Council. Worked in the Trump administration both as head of external and intergovernmental. And then right after the transition, I went to the FDA with my colleague who was working for Senator Burr at the time from North Carolina. And the two of us were the first two people before Scott Gottlieb was even announced as a nominee to be FDA commissioner. And then well before that, in the Bush administration, I was at HHS under the wonderful Secretary Mike Leavitt. So part of what makes my experience great is that I had a chance to work for three amazing leaders, Secretary Azar, Secretary Leavitt, and then Scott Gottlieb as well.
Thanks, Jack. We're excited to get your perspective today, especially given all of the changes over the past few weeks. I think, Judy, we might start with you. You know, we've seen this sort of spate of executive orders really trying to realign the, federal policy around the Make America Healthy Again platform. Talk to us a little bit about where these executive orders are most likely to hit the rare disease community and some of the core policy areas we might be thinking about over the next year, 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah, so there's been a number of executive orders, obviously, and even those that don't directly impact healthcare have indirect impacts and might have indirect impacts for rare disease, like the reshaping of the federal workforce and what that might look like in terms of staffing at the various agencies, clinical research that's being done at NIH, et cetera. I think of one of the first executive orders that came out was on the drug pricing pilots. And so I think that was one that was of particular, I think, interest and direct impact. These were rescinding the orders. There was a model for a flat fee for generics, a model that was going to explore cell and gene therapy access and affordability, and then another was decreased Medicare payments for accelerated approvals. I think the industry and many of us in patient advocacy groups applauded the end of the decreased Medicare payments because there was a concern that it set a dangerous precedent that accelerated approval was somehow less than normal approval. It was also, I think, de-incentivizing smaller biotechs that were trying to develop therapies in rare disease. So I think that was sort of a welcome pause on that. On the accelerated approval, it just struck me strangely that, one part of the agency is saying this is so important and this is yielding such great results that we believe it should be fast-tracked, while on the other hand, another part of the agency is saying, well, yeah, you value it that much, but we're not going to compensate accordingly. So I think it really set up a dangerous precedent. And so I, for one, am glad that that's being re-examined. I think on the cell and gene therapy, I've heard from folks within the administration and the transition team that like they definitely understand that we have innovation that's operating and happening at a breakneck speed, and that regulation and access and affordability needs to and hasn't been keeping up. So I think we're going to see that come back. Whether or not that pilot, is slightly different or shifted remains to be seen. But I know that folks recognize that, we're now able to change people's, to do these gene therapies and possibly cure someone, yet the system with which we have to reimburse that is based on blood pressure medication. And so we need to reevaluate what that looks like. And I think CMMI could be tip of the spear of that. And while it's not been officially announced, it's been reported in the media that may be Abe Sutton. And I cannot say enough great things about him. And I think he's up for the challenge.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Jack, did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, Judy just mentioned Abe Sutton, and I'll just riff off of that. So that's a former colleague of ours who served both at the White House and HHS. And one point that I've been delivering to clients and on investor calls is that there's been an overwhelming focus on the HHS secretary nominee, RFK Jr. It's almost as if this one nomination has sucked up 90% of the oxygen in healthcare discussions. And what isn't discussed enough is, to what extent will Trump 2.0 HHS be different from 1.0? And I'm here to say, having served in two different administrations and seen kind of how things work, is that it is very hard and sometimes not smart to move away from what your position was previously. So anyone that wants to read the tea leaves on a whole host of issues that were not ever mentioned in the campaign, let's face it, almost no healthcare campaign issues were mentioned, on the Trump side. Look at 1.0 first. And that's a big task because you're talking about on the payment side, CMS, on the FDA side, you're talking about that. So you start with that, then you look at who's coming in, not only at the assistant secretary level and the, FDA commissioner nominee, Dr. McCary, but those folks' deputies, because a lot of them are coming from think tanks, whether it's the Paragon Institute, whether it's the America First Policy Institute, and they have pretty strong views on sub-issues that right now the administration doesn't even have a position on. And so one thing that we try to help, clients and others do is to think about personnel as policy. That's something Secretary Chow used to always say when I was at the Department of Labor. And so who are in those key deputy positions really, really matters. And we can talk a lot about that, but that's one of the perspective points that I like to make, is that people matter and what the first term positions were matter, because it will be very rare if you see a complete 360 from the new administration on any given point.
Thank you for that. And I think, what I'm hearing both here and elsewhere is that it's a little early to start making prognostications, though folks are asking. But if we are to make prognostications, as you say, look at 1.0, look at the personnel that are being considered for positions that may not have been sat in their chairs just yet, and that might be a good guide. Karin, I might turn it over to you. I don't want to forget about Congress in all of this. I think a lot of as Jack said, the RFK Jr. nomination has been taking up a lot of the attention. I suspect that as the FDA and CMS nominations go through, that will take up a lot of attention, but we can't forget about Congress. Karin, what would you say are some of Bio's sort of key focus areas in rare disease when it comes to legislative initiatives over the next year or 2 years?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that question, and how timely. Where just today we saw the reintroduction of the Orphan Cures Act, which is one of these pieces of legislation that is really vital to many in the rare disease community, because it helps protect these really vital rare disease drug development incentives. we at we represent the biotech industry. And a large part of that are small or mid-sized companies that are really trying hard to develop innovative life-saving therapies and bring them to market. We also know that biotech is vital to national security and to the economy. And what we are seeing, and in particular in the rare disease space, is really that it is taking longer and longer to stand up clinical trials, to develop products, bring them to the market successfully. And with the huge unmet need that we're seeing in the rare disease community, that is an increasing problem. So I think we see tremendous opportunities in really finding new ways to develop safe and effective therapies in innovative ways that bring treatments to patients faster. And Judy, I couldn't agree more with you about the importance of the accelerated approval pathway. We know how vitally important it is for so many of our patient communities to have access to products 2-3 years faster than otherwise. As you so eloquently said, most of our patients just don't have time to wait. The one thing that most patients, in particular in the rare space, have is time. So we have a number of key priorities in Congress right now that are really there to help support the incentives to make it possible to develop therapies for these really small populations where we know standing up and enrolling clinical trials is so particularly challenging, and making the economics work and bringing these products to market. So whether that is the pediatric priority review voucher program, which is really vital for many of our companies, and which I know is tremendously important for many in the rare disease community, and which unfortunately lapsed. So we have to get that reauthorized as quickly as possible. We have the orphan drug tax credit, which provides an opportunity for a tax credit for some of the research and development costs that are being incurred in developing products for rare diseases. And it's tremendously important to reestablish that to the 50% mark, which was originally in the Orphan Drug Act. We have orphan cures, which would address some of the problems with the Inflation Reduction Act that really penalize the further development of rare disease therapies for additional rare diseases, where we know this is vitally important for many in our community. We also have broader issues in Congress that go beyond the rare disease space, including PBM reform. So yes, Congress is tremendously important, and there's a lot of opportunity there. And it's really great to stand united with the rare disease community on many of these priorities.
Karin, thank you so much for that. And you touched really quickly on one issue there at the end. I might probe you a little bit. I know you and I love to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act whenever we get on the phone together. Any more specific thoughts on revisions, refinements, modifications? I think most of us are pretty much resigned to the fact that this program is here to stay, the negotiation program in particular, here to stay. The 15 drugs have recently named. We've seen the Trump administration make overtures about greater transparency in the process. What are your thoughts on IRA implementation this year?
Thank you so much for bringing that up. On the one hand, yes, we have the list of 15 drugs, and the time is ticking. My understanding is that some of the data submissions are still due March 1st. So we're really at a point where we know how important the patient perspective is. We've seen last year with the negotiations that patient perspective really helped provide some of that context. And so one of our priorities, and one of the priorities of many of the patient groups that have gone through this last year, is to make sure that the patient groups that are impacted are ready, that they understand how to navigate the processes, how to provide the information that is most helpful to the decision makers and to CMS. And just in fact, actually, we are going to have a webinar for the patient community on February 18th, really trying to hear from some of the patient groups that have weighed in effectively last year on the negotiations, and really trying to help them talk about what worked, what didn't work, and hopefully help some of the other groups that haven't engaged yet. So that's for this year. And then similarly that's on the regulatory side. On the legislative side, we have tremendous hope that several of the bills that were introduced last Congress that would address some of the challenges with the Inflation Reduction Act will make it into law this year. That includes orphan cures, which I already talked about. It includes the EPIC Act, which would address the pill penalty and the difference between the time until negotiation eligibility between drugs and biologics. It includes the Mini Act, which basically would fix some challenges about what is considered a drug versus a biologic in some of the really innovative molecular technologies that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so we have a number of priorities there that we hope will be moved forward this year.
Karin, thank you for that. I think that's and that's an area that a lot of us will be watching over the course of the next year. Jack, I might turn it over to you, and of course, Judy, Karin, please feel free to weigh on this as well. But you know, it's been a couple of weeks since the new Trump administration. Business as usual in DC, as the three of us know, and four of us being DC folks, recognize that that's been, you know, kind of turned on its head overnight. I think a lot of stakeholders have questions about, you know, sort of substantively and also technically how to engage. We heard Chris Jones from Representative Belarakis' office talk about, you know, sort of the collective engagement with the caucus. But first, I want to talk substance. How should rare disease companies, patient groups, providers, researchers be thinking about the Make America Healthy Again platform? What are the policy principles to be thinking about there?
Yeah, that is a good one, because even though I said it's going to be hard to overturn anything from 1.0, that doesn't mean that there are not new initiatives and new maha ways of thinking about existing issues. So when it comes to chronic disease, and you look at the various diseases that fall under the category of rare disease, so many of them are under that umbrella. And so one area I think you're going to be seeing a lot more, and it would be smart, I think, for not only this community, but any community, is when you're advocating to those that are seeking to have wins on the Make America Healthy Again platform or agenda, work in how the specific areas that you're working on fits under that. So I would put so much of what you all do in that category, because of the fact that if you listen to RFK Jr.'s, you know, testimony, when he wasn't talking about the vaccine stuff, he was spending almost all of his time looking at the statistics of, and this isn't a liberal or a conservative thing. You could be the most liberal person in the room and be advocating for the fact that we spend so much money as a country, and yet you look at our health statistics from the 60s to now, and point after point after point, we're actually worse off, even though we have amazing healthcare, we have amazing innovations, and we're in the hub of really healthcare in the country and in the world. And yet, especially with children, you see some terrible outcomes right now. And so I think finding a way to communicate in a way that fits into their model, as opposed to trying to battle it and say, you know, you all are Neanderthals, you don't believe in science. That, in my humble opinion, that is the wrong way to go. And then we'll talk about how to best engage specifically on some tactical ways. But turn it to Judy for her thoughts.
No, I think that's right. And I think, you know, Trump 47 is, you're seeing sort of strange bedfellows, right? And so think about what partnerships you might not normally have thought about, where you might have not common ground everywhere, but the things that you do agree on, and how those might overlay with parts of the MAHA movement. I think too, especially given, you know, as a rare disease mom whose son still lacks a therapy, a lot of us are trying to find ways of what can we do in lieu of therapeutics. And so food as medicine is a big thing that I know a lot of rare parents focus on. And so, you know, to try and buy our kids time, or at least put them into a really good position so that when that clinical trial does come, perhaps they will be able to qualify. So Wheeler's disease is a lysosomal storage disorder, and talking to parents, I've heard, you know, diets that they've done with their children have been helpful because it reduces the amount of waste that builds up even on a cellular level. So I think that's something that might be able to gain some particular interest. And then from there, you can, once the doors open a crack, then you can kind of keep advancing the conversation. But definitely try to find that common ground and where things can fit together versus trying to sort of hammer yourself in. I think that's not going to lead to success.
I'm going to jump in really fast and say, food as healthcare, I think after 4 years, one can look back and say that there likely has never been an administration that is going to focus on that which is unhealthy that we ingest, that you read anything that we all read and we know that, but too many Americans still don't. And as much as I think Secretary Leavitt and Azar and the former Democratic HHS secretaries, this was not a priority. This was not something that you heard them use the megaphone to talk about. And there's some real opportunities here to help make lots of people healthier through looking much harder at what are the additives and what is it that we're subsidizing through some of the programs that people are receiving funding for, and yet they're, you know, eating and drinking some of the most unhealthy things.
Absolutely. Karin, anything to add in there?
Just that I think I'm a veterinarian by training, and coming from the veterinary space, I know how vitally important food and nutrition is in impacting the disease course. As a veterinarian, I've seen that time and again, and just really agree with Jack and Judy, in particular in the rare disease space. If you don't have any therapies, we need to think outside the box, and we need to think at everything we can do to modify the disease and to slow down disease progression where we can.
Great. No, thanks so much for that. I want to just pause for a second. I know we've been saving questions for the end, and you all have been sitting there and listening so patiently. Any questions at this stage for the panel here? What's going on in Washington? How to engage in Washington? We've got, you should have a mic on your table right there in front of you, if you wouldn't mind using it. Thank you.
It's on? There
Yes.
we go. Hi, David Brindley, Biotechnology. So we are a transatlantic regulatory affairs house. So, you know, if you want to take your EMA trial and make it here, vice versa, that's our business. And pretty much every single one of our rare disease clients has been really frustrated by the priority review voucher situation and the uncertainty there, and it being removed from the app, you know, recently. I appreciate that it's probably not top of anyone's list in DC right now, but any thoughts on how that may progress, and also the timing of any certainty for those in the community?
I think it's at the top of a lot of people's list, but Judy, let me turn it over to you. And yeah, and certainly Karin, if you have something to add to that too.
From our perspective, definitely it's top priority. We know the time is ticking. We know every day that the program is not reauthorized has detrimental effects on that upstream early rare disease drug development, which is so high risk, and so it's such a fragile ecosystem. So timing wise, we are hoping that as soon as possible. We know that the current government funding is until March 14th. So we're hoping that very soon we will see a reauthorization. As was mentioned before, the Pediatric Priority Review Voucher Program has such broad bipartisan, bicameral support. We've seen the rare disease community really rally around it in amazing ways. Everybody understands, I think, in Washington, D.C., how vital this program is. It's just hopefully a matter of time to get it reauthorized, and we know that we don't have much time. But Judy, please, I would love your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, we're also coming up on Rare Disease Day. There's going to be a lot of activation, and I think if there hasn't been movement on it by the end of this month, they're going to hear about it from the tens of thousands of rare disease families who are going to be descending upon Washington, me being one of them. I think in addition, you know, I know Buddy Carter, I think, has been talking about a number of issues that did not make it through on the CR as it relates to health and how that's a top priority for him as well. So I think there's definitely folks paying attention to it. It's at the top of the list, I think, for all of the different advocacy groups. I also think, though, that the top of the list is just like, everybody appreciates regulatory certainty. And I think, trying to figure out, and especially with the new Rare Disease Innovation Hub, like, what is that going to look like at FDA, and how might things change in order to make this path a little less burdensome in an already difficult road for some of these therapeutic journeys.
Speaking of the Rare Disease Hub, I am very proud that our Washington Health Innovation Council had the director that created that at one of our meetings, and you, Judy, at the headquarters of the Medical Device Association, AdvaMed, spoke to the group. And by the way, I want to highlight the Wall Street Journal article that Judy mentioned. You should all check that out. And hopefully another article is going to be coming out this year as well. And then I'll just say, March 14th has been mentioned a couple of times. So that's the budget deadline. There were some unfortunate things like the reauthorization, like the PBM reform. Some of us think it's unfortunate that it didn't get over the goal line. So I would expect to see a host of, hopefully those two in particular items, that get pushed over the goal line, which means pretty significant healthcare wins very early on.
Absolutely, absolutely. In areas where bipartisan support are, preeminent, and opportunities for, some unity on that front come together. Judy, I want to spend some time with you, not only as a former Trump official, but also as a rare disease parent and founder of a rare disease organization. How do you look at the scene in DC differently as both a policy expert and a rare disease caregiver and advocate?
It's really strange, to be honest, because it's like, as a parent or a mom, you're just, ready to sort of like storm the beaches. But having been in the agency and understanding processes and how things have to go, and the other factors that impact what is done and how it's done, I think gives me just a different perspective, because if I thought that it would help get my son closer to a cure, I would be camping out on the steps of White Oak. That's where FDA is, for those that may not know. But I also recognize that there are things that constrain the FDA, and there are, and some of that is just longstanding precedent. Some of that is actual, congressional mandates. Some of that is just, this is just how we've always done it, and nobody's taken a step to think about how to do it differently. And so I'm hopeful under the new administration that there's that latitude is given. I think, I would like to highlight Peter Marks at the FDA. He is just, I think, a unique champion, and we need more Peter Marks at the FDA who are able to understand that we need to have the rigor and that gold standard, but also recognizing, and I think, one of the other parent advocates said it well, like, we're not comparing apples to apples. We're not comparing apples to kiwis. Like, this is just totally different. And so we need rational flexibility. We need common sense in some ways. John Crowley, who is the head of bio, rare disease parent himself, formerly at Amicus. Amicus was one of the few therapeutic companies that was working on a CLN3 gene therapy. And they ended up returning those rights back to Children's Nationwide in Ohio. But he has shared the story about how, in working on the CLN3 gene therapy, they went to the FDA and they said, we're going to need a 5-year placebo-controlled trial with something like 60 kids. There are not, that doesn't exist in the United States. Beyond Batten Disease Foundation, a foundation with which my family works with and supports, has been working on a version of miglustat called BBDF 101. And miglustat has been around for more than 20 years. It's used in Gaucher disease, Niemann-Pick type C has tried to get it approved in their therapeutic area. I think I may have actually gotten approved in that area. But this is a family foundation that has been working tirelessly to try and get this across the finish line. And they have been told, you have to do a placebo-controlled trial. You need this many patients, which made it move from a US-based trial to now a global trial. And I think FDA needs to recognize that a lot of this sort of groundwork that's been done in the clinical space, the clinical research for rare disease is being done by family foundations, not by giant pharmaceutical companies. And they do not have the money or the lobbyists or the people to be able to navigate. They do not have those resources to navigate the FDA. And so I think FDA needs to start, in addition to exercising rational flexibility, recognizing where these advances are coming from, and that a little handholding might be needed. Like I strongly believe that you can want somebody to win without letting them cheat. And how can we get an FDA in some ways that's more of that does a coaching role while at the same time being an umpire? And I think that's possible. And I think Peter Marks has demonstrated time and time again that that's possible. So I'm truly hopeful that this will happen, and that that we recognize that we've got to keep pace with the science. And President Trump did right to try. So I'm really hoping the right ingredients are going to be there, and I'm looking forward to hopefully being part of the conversation that gets us to that place.
Thanks for that, Judy. And you bring up an interesting point. Sort of longstanding processes. Medicare turned 60 years old this year. The first Medicare beneficiaries, for folks who want to know, were Harry Truman and Bess Truman. Born in the 1800s, coverage policies at Medicare originated in the era of the iron lung. And we're talking about cell and gene therapies, advanced technologies for diseases with, small patient populations. We're talking about advanced technologies. Jack, this is a question for you. What are your thoughts on, personnel as policy, the other health-related nominations that we're going to see, Macri, Oz, Bhattacharya? Where do they stand on this sort of balance between, kind of regulatory stagnancy and advanced technology? And what do you think we're going to see in some of those discussions?
Thank you for that, because honestly, you spend your time watching cable and you're trying to listen to the healthcare portions of the debates, you don't even hear their names mentioned. And yet, two of the most important people in healthcare, when they get confirmed, and I have every belief that both of them will be the new head of the FDA and new head of NIH, more than the CDC, to tell you the truth. So Dr. Makary, let's just quickly look at what are his tools that he brings to the table. Oncologist at Johns Hopkins, National Academy of Medicine, graduate of the Harvard School of Public Health Affairs. He's written 250 articles. He's a regular on cable news. He's a great speaker, focusing on chronic disease prevention and, in my view, balanced views of COVID response, of what happened, what should have happened, and what we should do in the future. So with him, you have someone that is going to be pro-innovator in order to help patients get more technologies faster without impacting safety. And I think what you were saying about how there are times when the way things have always been done needs to be shifted, especially when you're talking about communities that have a death sentence, and why are we sticking to the old way of doing things? So I think that someone like Dr. Makary is going to feel very empowered, more than even RFK, by the fact that you've got a White House that is saying, let's not play by the old rules if they make no sense. Dr. Bhattacharya, not as many people know about him. Stanford professor, epidemiologist, also I think he has a PhD in economics. His big thing at NIH, and if there's another Wall Street Journal article from December 6th, I think everyone should read, which is, it really digs into what his beliefs are about how NIH has been too conservative. And I'm not talking about politically, I'm talking about the funds that they've been spending. And he shows some statistics about how researcher ages have gone up in terms of who's winning NIH grants, as opposed to younger researchers who are getting their research proposals denied. And he wants to see a higher percentage of funds going to those more innovative studies that may yield nothing, but those that are positive can then yield very positive results. And so I hadn't really thought about that with him, because he's mainly known in the media as someone that had a very different view of the COVID vaccine mandates and the mask mandates. But if you look at what he believes about NIH, I think there's some ways there that are hopeful for people that are pro innovation. That is thoughts on that. And I think that structurally, he also has pointed out that maybe there should be term limits for center directors. Maybe the overwhelming amount that NIH spends on infectious diseases should be counterbalanced with what are we spending on diabetes? What are we spending on cancer? I hope also what do we spend on rare diseases? But he, I think, has in his sights that if you have a certain former head of the infectious disease center who had been there for 30 years, who's very charismatic and media friendly, and everyone in the Senate loved him, and I won't use the F word name because it's a little controversial among some, but I mean, Dr. Fauci was a force of nature. But maybe NIH's priorities need to be shifted to some degree in terms of the types of diseases that they're trying to cure. So these are the types of things that those two leaders, I think, bring to the table, and we'll see who their deputies are as well.
Great. No, really appreciate that. We've got about a minute left. Any final thoughts, final closing remarks that you want to share with the attendees about thinking about Washington and policy issues that are upcoming? Karin, I might start with you.
Absolutely. I think taking a step back, we've seen tremendous innovation and tremendous progress for so many patient communities in the rare space, but there's so many that still don't have safe and effective therapies. And I agree with the need to really reevaluate how can we bring safe and effective therapies in an effective way to these families. Thinking about how long it takes to stand up a clinical trial in the US versus other parts of the world, thinking about how long it takes to navigate contracting, to navigate working with IRBs, thinking really about the incentive structure and all the different kind of hits to the early drug development and rare disease drug development ecosystem that we've seen. We have a tremendous opportunity right now to move some of these bills forward, to make some of these reforms and really prevent downstream effects. Part of the problem that we're seeing in DC is that a lot of the policies that we are advocating for right now are impacting things that happen really early on in the drug development process. And the impacts, the negative impacts of policies that we see today on which drugs come to market, that's 10 years down the line. But by the time we're starting to see some of these impacts in drug approvals, in designations, etc., it's probably too late to prevent a lot of the negative impacts. So if I can leave you with anything, I think the time is now to protect that vital ecosystem, whether it's the Pediatric Priority Review Voucher Program, the Orphan Drug Tax Credit, Orphan Cures, PBM reform. All of these things are really important to make sure that it's feasible to develop these really high-risk therapies for these small populations. And again, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Karin. We're so glad you joined us. Judy, any final thoughts?
I definitely echo that, because I think people are not understanding that some of the more anti-innovation policy, how that's impacting really at the very beginning. I think, my big things are just, I really hope that we preserve and enhance therapeutic development initiatives and, incentivize that. I think we need to, like I said multiple times, exercise some rational flexibility and make that consistent on how we evaluate therapies, because predictability and consistency of those approaches is really important. And I know that FDA has exercised it before, but how can we do it in a way that gives stability and gives sort of the comfort to some of these companies to be able to feel like they can pursue these rare therapies. And I think, you know, recognizing that family foundations are a little different than some of the other folks that might be coming through, and just like the regulatory state needs to keep pace with the science. And I think they need to also appreciate, you know, FDA has done a lot, as has NIH and other parts of the agency, even the secretary. I remember Secretary Azar always, you know, would call Jack up any meeting we were having and say, let's make sure we get the patient groups in here when we're having a conversation. Like, I know that it's exhausting. Like, I'm exhausted. I have 2 boys under 5, one of which has a rare neurodegenerative disease and a full-time job, 2 dogs, and a fabulous husband. But like, you've got to keep trying, and you've got to keep talking, and you've got to keep telling your story and what it is that this means to you beyond paper. You know, like natural history data, like, hey, we're all participating in these natural history trials, and we know it's not going to necessarily give us a cure, but like, use that in lieu of placebo. Like, help me help you. And I think the more that FDA and the other parts of the agency hear from parents and patients and recognize those needs, you know, the more that we can kind of hopefully get us to the finish line, or get us at least advancing the ball on some of these more complicated therapies. Because the hurdles are big, but I see these parents every day, and I know that they can meet them or surpass them. And I just want to encourage everyone to keep doing that.
Thanks for that, Judy. Jack, final words.
Yep, I can't beat either of those two. So instead of going broad, I'm going to get very specific on a tip, which is, think about, I'm glad you mentioned Secretary Azar wanting the patient groups, because honestly, even though he came from Eli Lilly before, we had more patient organizations coming in during the drug pricing legislation and regulatory development, the blueprint, before and after, than we actually had pharma companies, to tell you the truth. So please consider coming to the office of the secretary, bring a coalition of your groups, and then don't just accept who they say, we're going to have one person meet with you. Ask, by the way, could we have a counselor who handles FDA and someone from CMS and maybe from NIH? Maybe you'll get them, maybe not, but sometimes it's up to groups to help people that are in government connect the dots and have a much more meaningful meeting. So that's my sort of practical tip. Any patient organization that is here is welcome to attend our Washington Health Innovation Council at no cost. If you're an innovator company, then, you know, we'll talk about what a membership will be. But any patient group, we'd love to have you, just like we've had Battens and others as well. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Jack. That's really and really resonates on the theme of this community here and sharing resources and sharing knowledge. Judy Stecker, Jack Kalavritinos, Karin Hoelzer, thank you so much for the time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us. Thanks.